January 2006, a woman disappeared in Linwood, Washington, USA. She attended a club for Alcoholics Anonymous and never missed a single meeting without a valid reason. She was a role model, having been sober for 8 years at the time of the mentioned event. However, she eventually stopped visiting her friends who were struggling with similar problems. They thought the missing woman had relapsed into her addiction. But it turned out that something much more horrific had happened to her. Nicole Pietz was born in late January 1973. The girl grew up in King County and was educated at Eastern Washington College. The family traveled to Seattle in the summer and spent most of their time at Lake Sammamish. Nicole had a close relationship with her mother Gil and also a good relationship with her stepfather named Rod. Nicole met her future husband David in the 90s while working at a fitness club. They understood each other immediately and soon considered a romantic relationship and life together. The couple married only in 2002 after they confirmed their feeling. Their wedding was very beautiful and took place on the island of Maui, Hawaii. In 2005, the couple bought an apartment in Linwood, Washington, where they could spend their time in their favorite environment. At the time of their move, it was a developed but quiet town with less than 40,000 inhabitants. It had narrow streets, numerous bars and restaurants. It was very similar to their previous residence, and the young family fell in love with this place from the first moment. The woman was sociable and had many friends. Even in a new place, Nicole made new acquaintances within a few days, developing good friendships with some of them. She loved animals, often walked her dogs in the neighborhood, or relaxed at home with a few cats. Animals meant everything to her, and she took care of them like small children. Nicole was also professionally successful. After her education, she worked for a while in a fitness club, then became a manager in a mobile phone company. She lived not far from her office step, and the commute to and from work took no longer than 20 minutes. Nicole proved to be a valuable team member, easily finding a common language with all employees and helping solve everyone's problems. However, she also had problems. As a teenager, she was introduced to alcohol and later became addicted to it. This happened at the time when her parents divorced and she felt broken. Her mother worked as a flight attendant and was often traveling, leaving Nicole without proper supervision at her grandmother's, who was already quite old, so the girl got involved with bad company. The parents became aware of their daughter's problem in time. Fortunately, with the help and support of relatives, she managed to quit this harmful habit. Together, they attended Alcoholics Anonymous groups where Nicole could speak out, making it easier for her. However, her alcohol consumption did not go without consequences, causing serious health problems. As a result, Nicole was diagnosed with endometriosis at the age of 21 and underwent 3 surgeries, after which she was prescribed constant pain medication. According to her relatives, she took the medication only to cope with the pain that tormented her. By 2006, the 32-year-old woman had already stayed away from alcohol for 8 years, but remained a valued member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Nicole never missed a meeting, because it was not only an opportunity for her to deal with her problem, but also to help others overcome the disease together. Nicole knew what it meant to fight and inspired everyone around her optimism and success. From a young age, she loved to cook, and this interest developed as she got older. She enjoyed bringing various dishes she had prepared herself directly to her husband at work, which he loved her for. Nicole talked to her mother daily, with whom she was very close. The beginning of 2006, Nicole looked forward to her 33rd birthday on January 27. Just 2 days before her birthday, she unexpectedly did not appear at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in the nearby town of Renton. David came home late from work that day and went straight to bed. According to him, his wife was still at home. However, the next morning, she left the house, and he never saw his wife again. David tried to call her to ask if everything was okay, but Nicole ignored all the calls. The man thought that his wife might be upset because he did not talk to her during dinner the previous evening, which was her habit, and went straight to bed because he was tired. So, he thought about how to apologize to his wife and went to work. Throughout the day, he kept trying to call his beloved, but she remained silent, and this began to worry him. Therefore, the husband contacted several of her friends and her mother, but no one had seen Nicole. In the evening, the man returned home and found his wife was not there. When she did not come for dinner, he decided to contact the police. Nicole's husband called the sheriff's office that evening, but was told that not enough time had passed to consider the woman missing. The man managed to persuade the officers to check her whereabouts, believing that his wife's behavior was completely uncharacteristic, and he strongly suspected that something had happened to her. Investigators arrived at the couple's apartment, where, besides Nicole, her Volkswagen Jetta was also missing. She was on her usual way to work in the morning, but disappeared somewhere between Linwood and Renton. The missing woman's mother and stepfather were also worried about her disappearance. The woman had not received a call from her daughter all day and considered this a bad sign. The parents of the missing woman supported his decision to contact the police. The officers called Nicole's social circle, and after ensuring that no one had seen her since her disappearance, began searching for her. That same day, the missing woman's family booked a flight to Washington. They hoped for the best and wanted to provide any possible assistance to find their daughter as quickly as possible. Everyone was bewildered, as Nicole was a very reliable and responsible person. She would never disappear or ignore attempts to contact her. Even if she couldn't respond immediately, she would call back soon. The longer her silence lasted, the more worried her parents and husband became. Everyone involved in the search for Nicole immediately set to work. Even her mother and stepfather rushed to the police as soon as they flew into the city. Members of the Alcoholics Anonymous Club, who loved Nicole dearly and wanted to help her family, also participated in the search and rescue operation. This club was very important to her. Not only did she never miss a meeting, but this time she was supposed to receive a reward for 8 years of sobriety, of which she was very proud. There was no single reason for her to go somewhere and leave all her affairs behind. Nicole's answering machine was overflowing with calls from dozens of friends and family members, but not a single one got through. Some thought she might be facing alcohol problems again, although she had successfully managed her addiction for years. The reality, however, was much more frightening. In the meantime, the police were not only busy searching for the missing woman, but also looking for her car. Every neighborhood in Linwood was combed, but without success. The missing woman's parents, Rod and Gail, were not idle either. They set up a website to receive information about their missing daughter. Although there were reactions to their plight, most of the messages left by users were wishes for the search's success, and the remaining information was false. The search seemed to be at a dead end until chance intervened. On February 7th, a local jogger in the Sunset Park Forest area, where there was a small lake, decided to take a shortcut through the plantation's outskirts and stumbled upon a strange object under a blackberry bush. From a distance, he couldn't make out what it was, so he decided to approach closer and was horrified to find the naked body of a woman. The man immediately called the police. Officers familiar with the Nicole Pietz case were working in the forest. They immediately identified the body as hers. It was evident to the naked eye that the woman had not died of natural causes. Since she was not wearing clothes, it was assumed that she had been raped and that this was probably the motive for the crime. However, the medical examiner determined that it was not a rape. After an autopsy in the lab, it was found that the deceased had sustained several injuries during the blows. The cause of death was suffocation. Numerous blunt force injuries were found on the woman's body, including on her legs, torso, and head. Nicole's murder was extremely brutal, suggesting a personal motive stemming from hatred. But who would do such a thing to Nicole if she had no enemies? The case was reclassified from disappearance to murder. The news of Nicole's murder was devastating for her husband and parents. They couldn't believe that their loved one was gone. Investigators began tracing the victim's last movements, reviewing her bank card transaction. turned out that she had last used it on January 30th in a neighboring town, where she paid for gas. Investigators requested video footage from the gas station, suspecting that the murderer might have used her card, and they had the chance to see him on the recording. While waiting for the footage, officers continued searching for the victim's car, as it could provide crucial data for the investigation. They re-examined the identity of the murdered woman and her social circle. There were no leads. Nicole was one of the friendliest women at her workplace and in her club. She had no enemies and could never have had any. She was a loyal friend, a loving wife, tender daughter, a competent employee, and loved her pets. She even turned her own addiction to good use by supporting people who couldn't follow her example, giving up alcohol. While investigators used their methods to find the car, family and friends were not idle. They began actively reporting the missing car and their loved ones' whereabouts. The relatives made a public appeal, asking people to watch for the car and not to touch it if found. Flyers stated that the car was involved in a woman's murder and instructed people to call the police immediately. This helped. Attentive residents found Nicole's car on February 21, 2006. It was parked near Washington University. The vehicle was immediately seized for laboratory analysis. Law enforcement hoped to find clues about the perpetrator and reconstruct the chain of events that led to the tragedy. They found a large amount of trash and items in the car, ranging from books to sports equipment. The police were interested in something more significant, such as a data carrier, ideally the victim's phone. Investigators found out that someone had continued using the woman's ID and credit card after her disappearance. They were missing from the car and the victim's apartment. Investigators actively pursued the theory that Nicole's car might have broken down on the road, and she was picked up by a stranger who brutally attacked her. The car was in an unusual place, since Nicole had to drive to another town. Based on the seat position, the car was driven by someone significantly larger and stronger than Nicole. In the lab, the seat position was carefully measured to gather information about the likely perpetrator. Additionally, DNA traces, hair, and a single fingerprint were found inside the car. All this was meticulously collected and matched with databases. Meanwhile, several patrol officers went to the area where the car was found and questioned residents of the surrounding houses to see if anyone had seen the moment when the murdered woman's car appeared in the parking lot or the driver who parked it. This led to no results, even though the car had been parked there since February 10th. The police determined this because a parking ticket dated February 10th for unauthorized parking was found on the windshield. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras to help with the investigation. Forensic examination results, ordered to evaluate the found DNA traces, didn't take long. All DNA traces belonged to Nicole and David, with no foreign samples found in the car, which was strange, leaving the investigation with no new information to solve the crime. By early April, there were still no leads. The missing woman's mother and stepfather offered a reward of $10,000 for anyone providing information leading to the capture of the perpetrator. The family and friends of the victim wanted to stir up public interest. This could not only help obtain valuable information, but also have a psychological effect. Usually, murderers follow the developments after the crime. An active movement could not go unnoticed. Police officers love this technique because the criminals get nervous and make mistakes. To this end, the mother repeatedly appeared on various TV channels. During this time, her family had to return to Arizona due to work, but remained in constant contact with the investigating officers. The mother and stepfather were deeply affected by the tragedy, as Nicole was very close to both of them. The husband was inconsolable and frustrated by the lengthy investigation, but nothing advanced the investigation. Weeks turned into months without results. In September of that year, the case was handed over to another investigator who was highly experienced in his field. At that time, investigators were still gathering information about the woman's movements and trying to form a complete picture. The new investigator immediately applied for a search warrant for the house where the murdered woman lived. It turned out that this had not been done yet. The new investigator wanted to search the house and her belongings for clues, especially to check Nicole's computer data. They found no trace of the crime, no blood, or other clues in the house. There was also nothing of interest on the computer. David supported the investigation, but processing the massive amount of data took a long time. During this time, investigators continued to talk to witnesses and people who knew the victim, including 62-year-old Barbara, who had befriended the deceased after meeting her at the Alcoholics Anonymous Club. On the day of the disappearance, they were supposed to meet for coffee in the evening, but Nicole did not show up. Her friend initially thought she was late, but that was unlike her. So Barbara tried calling Nicole. She tried several times that day, but none of the calls were answered by the missing woman. It had been exactly a year since Nicole was murdered. For her family and friends, it had been torture. The police had a massive workload during this time, yet they never managed to catch the brutal criminal. At this point, the parents of the deceased were in a house in Arizona, suffering from the consequences of a murder committed by a monster. Their pain had not diminished over the year. Rob and Gail were desperate and decided to hire a private investigator. They couldn't make sense of the inconsistencies in the case that kept cropping up, like Nicole leaving the house without her wedding ring, which was entirely out of character for a woman so proud of her marriage and who would never under any circumstances take off the symbol of her marriage. The private investigator got to work, but it was unsuccessful. In July of the following year, parents of the victim increased the reward for clues to the murderer to $25,000, with another $1,000 added by organizations involved in crime prevention and the search for missing persons. The excitement over these events was still present in the city, as the residents realized that a dangerous criminal was on the loose. He apparently had no motive, meaning he could be a maniac who could strike again at any time. Another year passed without new information about the murderer. Then, the stepfather and mother of the victim increased the fund by another $10,000. The police again applied for a search warrant to examine the missing woman's computer. Investigators were confident that it could contain information pointing to the perpetrator. In October 2009, a private investigator hired by the couple was charged with theft. Although it did not concern the heroes of our story, the man deceived one of his clients, claiming he had found evidence in the case but needed money to process it. The grieving parents gave him additional money, after which the investigator disappeared and immediately took another job. His license was subsequently revoked as the court found he did this regularly. Thus, Nicole's parents were left without a private investigator and without any clues to the murderer. By 2011, the anniversary of Nicole's death marked 5 years. During this time, a suspect was sought, but no information was released. This was because law enforcement had enough evidence to prove involvement in the murder. However, soon there was a breakthrough. On March 21, 2012, a suspect was finally arrested. It was the husband of the murdered woman, David Pietz. At that time, investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence against the murderer. He was detained with bail set at $1 million, which he could not afford, and remained behind bars. According to the prosecutor, the case could only be advanced thanks to innovative technologies that were simply not available before. This was primarily due to the development and introduction of more precise DNA processing techniques and the advancement of mobile communication, which is now easier to trace. Since investigators could not identify any enemies of the victim, they immediately focused on the spouse of the deceased, as in such cases, partners are usually involved. Moreover, his statements about the previous evening sounded unconvincing. Investigators also assumed that only 2 people's fingerprints were found in Nicole's car, hers and her husband. If a stranger had been in the car, there would have been fingerprints left, because they were not wiped. The perpetrator had wiped the fingerprints. None would have been in the car. Reclined driver's seat matched David's proportion. A man who looked very much like David was captured by the gas station's surveillance cameras, He had also used his wife's phone after her disappearance, making several calls in different parts of the city. The officers suspected that the perpetrator was trying to confuse the investigation this way. Using modern tracking technology, the exact locations from which the calls were made were determined, and Nicole could not have been there. She was already dead at that time. Her husband's phone was pinged at the same locations. The murder method was strangulation, which is usually personal. Some evidence found at the crime scene indicated that the perpetrator was much closer to the victim than initially assumed. It also matched the fact that the woman had not been sexually assaulted. Nicole's mouth had a dental retainer she used while sleeping, meaning she was killed at night or early in the morning while still in bed. This is also indicated by her appearance. The woman was unclothed and her feet and hands were completely clean. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she did not resist and was simply brought there. To determine the exact time of death, medical examiners examined the stomach contents of the victim. They found that the food Nicole had eaten the previous evening had not been digested, indicating she was killed before she woke up in the morning and went to work. The only unclear thing was the perpetrator's motive. At first glance, they seemed to be loving spouses with a wonderful, warm relationship and feelings. However, it turned out that it was all just a show, and there were many reasons for the act. At that time, family was in serious financial trouble. On the day of the murder, David was supposed to receive a promotion they had been looking forward to. When he returned with nothing, he was initially very unsure. The family head was a partygoer, enjoying alcohol and smoking weed. Large part of the family budget went to his pleasures. Nicole, on the other hand, had invested much time and effort to overcome this addiction and had been sober for many years. David envied his wife for this. Additionally, the man had an affair on the side. The investigation revealed that during his relationship with the murdered woman, David had at least 4 different girlfriends. His extravagant lifestyle led him to constantly try to persuade his wife to have a threesome. Once he drugged her in a club and tried to persuade her, but she continued to refuse, which she did not like. The man constantly accused his wife of being too boring. Nicole, on the other hand, blamed him for spending too much money on fun and alcohol and said it was time for him to settle down. In his club fun, he met women with whom he had sexual intercourse. David, who appeared to the police officers as a grieving widower, was actually not one. He did not wait long to mourn his wife's death. In the first days after Nicole's disappearance, he began looking for new lovers. When he was arrested, David already had another family and a child. For the victim's parents, this was very painful, as their daughter always dreamed of having children, but he wanted nothing to do with it. Additionally, the victim's husband immediately started collecting certificates to get a substantial sum in life insurance for his murdered wife. After establishing all these facts, the puzzle came together, and David was summoned for questioning, where he denied his involvement in the murder. When asked to take a lie detector test, he agreed. The technology showed that he was lying. All this confirmed the thoughts of the victim's mother and stepfather. From the beginning, they believed that Nicole's husband was responsible for her death and had informed the investigators about it. After all these years, the investigators had evidence against him. The man was arrested and charged with murder. David categorically denied his involvement in the crime. The trial began in September 2013, 7 years after Nicole's death. Her family and friends were in the courtroom, where justice was supposed to prevail. The murderer's lawyer tried to attribute the crime to Nicole having relapsed into her alcohol addiction and possibly becoming dependent on prescription drugs, as an empty bottle of prescription pills was found during the bathroom search. The defense argued that all evidence against David was circumstantial and that the case was fabricated and based on speculation. Nicole's parents testified in court that the deceased's husband never participated in searches or distributed flyers, only pretending to be upset. At the same time, they knew about the marital problems between the couple. Regarding the pills, the mother noted that it was a prescription painkiller prescribed to Nicole for severe pain after she injured her back shortly before her death, significantly improving her condition. The lawyers not only tried to delay the trial, but also confused the jury. Even if the medication was needed for pain relief rather than addiction, it in no way justified the brutal murder of the woman. After reading all the case materials, the jury began deliberations, which lasted 6 hours. In the end, they found 36-year-old David Pietz guilty of murdering his own wife. According to Washington state law, he faced 10 to 18 years in prison. The man was sentenced to the maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. He had been the prime suspect from the beginning, but it took a long 7 years to prove his guilt. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.